Mr. Durst is here, Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. DeGuerin representing him, and we have Mr. Lewin, Mr. Milius, Mr. Miata. You may continue with your cross-examination.
Mr. Durst, I want to move to a new subject area, and I want to talk about Peter Schwarz and the Peter Schwarz incident. You agree this happened on February 1st, 1981, correct?
I have no idea. That's about right, I guess.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat your answer, Mr. Durst? The mic was off.
I am not sure it was February 1, 1981, but it sounds about right.
And you were present in court when Peter Schwartz's testimony was played, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to play an excerpt for you. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. This is going to be PS 046, page 24, line 14 to page 25, line 11.
And Your Honor, this is from People's 48A. Thank you.
Were there any other males in the room when Robert Durst arrived?
I was the only guy.
What happened after you saw him?
While I was standing there, he looked at Kathy, and then he looked over at me, and he said, well, you're the only man here, or the only guy here.
We'll stop you there.
Mm-hmm.
What was his tone of voice when he said, "You're the only guy here"?
It was threatening.
What was his facial expression when he said, "You're the only guy here"?
He looked enraged.
If you know, if you recall, or even if you observed, what, if anything, was his facial expression when he first looked over towards Kathy?
He looked angry.
What happened next after he said, "Well, you're the only guy here"?
He rushed forward and kicked me in the eye. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the door. And when he rushed forward, even though I had my knees up and my arms over my knees, he kicked between my legs and between my arms and kicked me under the right eye, fracturing the bone.
Mr. Durst, is that an accurate version of what happened?
That is a very inaccurate version of what happened.
Your testimony, you agree, was completely different, correct?
Completely different.
You mentioned returning from Xenon and smelling marijuana, and that you were concerned because of the smell that you would be arrested for possession of marijuana, correct?
I don't know if I mentioned being arrested. The hall smelled like marijuana, which was clearly coming from our apartment, and that made me concerned.
Right, concerned you mentioned because at the time you testified you were worried that potentially that law enforcement might become alerted to the smell of marijuana, correct?
Correct.
Now, you, back at that time, you were smoking marijuana every day, correct?
Around that time, correct.
And is it true that one of the reasons that you would smoke marijuana over the years, you would use it to, as an example, treat pain, to treat headaches, correct?
No, I wouldn't use it to treat headaches.
So you would smoke marijuana only recreationally?
Correct.
You've also testified that, unfortunately and also unfairly, and you kind of volunteered this during your testimony, that it was only people of color who were being arrested for smoking marijuana back then. Do you recall testifying to that?
I don't remember testifying to that, but that did seem to be the situation.
I want you to assume for a moment that in fact you did testify to that. Do you understand my hypothetical?
Mr. Lewin, wasn't it cocaine?
No, no, marijuana, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Do you recall testifying to that, Mr. Durst? Or now I'm going to have you assume the hypothetical. I want you to assume for a moment that you testified that back then that it was only people of color who were being arrested for smoking marijuana.
I would say mostly people of color.
Right. My question would be, can you tell me why you would have volunteered such a fact in describing that you smelled marijuana in the Peter Schwarz situation? In other words, what made you say that in fact only people of color were being arrested for marijuana? Why did you say that?
I assume I was answering some kind of question.
I want you to assume for a moment that Mr. DeGuerin did not ask you, Mr. Durst, can you tell me who was being arrested for marijuana, that in describing what happened, that you in essence said that you came back, you smelled marijuana, you were concerned, and then you mentioned that back then it was only people of color who were being arrested for marijuana. I just wanted to ask you why you would have said that if you know.
I guess I was answering his question.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you were a wealthy white guy living in an expensive apartment in Manhattan at the time? Correct?
I agree.
So can you tell me why in any way, shape, or form it would matter with respect to your concern about police involvement in marijuana emanating from your apartment? Why would that matter?
A hall stank of marijuana that was clearly wafting out of our apartment. That's why I was concerned.
But I'm asking you, when you say you were concerned, what did the marijuana wafting out of the apartment, what did that have to do with anything else that happened?
I don't know what you mean with anything else that happened.
Well, Mr. Durst, you're aware, when you're being asked about this, you're aware that after you come into the apartment, there's going to be a confrontation involving you and Peter Schwarz, correct?
I had no idea I was going to have a confrontation with Peter Schwarz.
No, that's not what I'm asking you. When you're telling this story, you were on the witness stand, you're explaining what happened. You're telling a story, you're saying, I get back from the club. I smell marijuana wafting from the room, and I'm concerned about, paraphrasing, the police getting involved, etc. What does that have to do with anything that's going to happen inside the apartment?
I have no idea.
Well, you further went on to say that when you entered the apartment, there was a dinner plate, and your quote was, full of a mound of cocaine and a bunch of unraveled dollar bills. Remember testifying to that? That was your testimony.
I'm reading it. You want to give me a chance to read it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I remember testifying to that, and that's what I remember.
Can you tell me what seeing a mound of cocaine and dollar bills rolled up would in any way have to do with the incident that's going to happen between you and Mr. Schwarz?
Like I said when I testified, on the coffee table was one of our dinner plates. On the dinner plate was a square of aluminum foil. On the aluminum foil was a mound of cocaine. Around the dinner plate, there were several semi-rolled up dollar bills and several Coke spoons.
Right, my question is, why did you add this detail? Does that have anything to do with the incident that's going to happen between you and Mr. Schwarz, or are you just trying to muddy him up?
Your question is money.
So, let me ask something. When you said that, all I could think of was Scarface and Tony Montana sitting with this mound of cocaine everywhere. I got something for you with his machine gun, etc. Were you literally getting this from a movie?
Sustained.
So, Mr. Durst, would you agree that never, not to Mr. Jarecki, not to anybody in law enforcement, not in your interview with me, never before your testimony the other day did you ever mention that there were mounds of cocaine and a bunch of dollar bills and Coke spoons? Would you agree? That's something brand new in your testimony.
That was always my testimony.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Durst. You never said that to Detective Struck, correct?
I don't think Detective Struck. They were talking about February 1st of '81. I did not know Detective Struck then.
No, Mr. Durst. You were asked all kinds of questions by Detective Struck about everything involving your relationship with Kathy. You were also asked and discussed in detail during your interviews with Andrew Jarecki, the situation with Peter Schwarz. I've played clips before. You agree, Mr. Jarecki asked you and you discussed Peter Schwarz at length, correct?
I don't recall.
So you're saying, Mr. Durst, you have no memory of having discussed the Peter Schwarz incident with Andrew Jarecki during your interviews with him?
That is correct.
I want you to assume, Mr. Durst, that you never mentioned anything to anybody in law enforcement that has ever been documented, to Andrew Jarecki, to myself and detectives during an interview, that you never mentioned anything about a mound of cocaine and rolled up dollar bills prior to your testimony on August 11, 2021. I want you to assume that. Would you be able to explain, if that's true, why that's the first time these details ever came out?
I had no reason to discuss Peter Schwarz with anybody until we were preparing for my testimony here, when we knew it would come up.
So I just want to be clear. Are you denying that you discussed Peter Schwarz with Andrew Jarecki, or are you merely saying you don't remember?
I'm not denying it. I am saying I don't recall.
So I'm telling you right now, I want you to assume you spoke to Andrew Jarecki about Peter Schwarz. And given that you've already said that Mr. Jarecki wants to make things sound exciting and he wants to have you make up stuff, I would assume he would have told you, Bob, tell him about the pile of cocaine. How was it that never came up with Andrew Jarecki? Can you explain that?
You're asking me to assume it never came up.
Yes, I'm asking you to assume it didn't. No, I'm asking you to assume you spoke to Andrew Jarecki and you never mentioned piles of cocaine.
I don't remember talking to Jarecki about Peter Schwarz at all.
Okay, so again, listen to my question. I want you to assume that you did talk to Peter Schwarz.
So if I assume I talked to Andrew
I'm sorry,
Jarecki,
Andrew Jarecki. Thank you, Your Honor. I want you to assume that you talked to Andrew Jarecki regarding Peter
are
Schwarz.
you going to tell me what you want me to assume I said?
Yes, I'm going to tell you, I want you to assume that you gave a detailed recitation of what happened and never mentioned anything about piles of cocaine or about marijuana wafting in from the room or about dollar bills rolled up or about Coke spoons. Would you have an explanation as to why you wouldn't have told him those clearly interesting and titillating details?
Well, I'm back where I started. I don't remember talking to Andrew Jarecki about Peter Schwarz, period.
Okay, do you recall during your testimony, Mr. Durst, that you literally said that, I just want to play it, RD 703 81121.
And Your Honor, this would be a new exhibit, People's 302 and 302A. Yes.
Peter Schwarz was standing up, working on one of the dollar bills to roll it up. I said to him, "It's late. You're the only guy that's still here. You should leave." He said, "I will leave when I'm good and ready to leave."
So what happened next?
I leaned forward across the coffee table and upended the dinner plate with the cocaine on it. Peter Schwarz grabbed me by my shoulders and the doors fell down.
You heard him describe that you kicked him. Did you kick him?
Not when we fell down, I think he hit his face on the coffee table. He might have hit his face on my foot, but I did not do anything that anybody would consider a kick.
I want to ask you, are you still sticking with this story as to what happened?
That's what happened.
And it's your testimony that you did not kick Peter Schwarz while he was on the ground, correct?
Correct.
But you would agree that you did get angry because you didn't like the fact that you believe Peter Schwarz was, quote, the only man there, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't like the fact that Peter Schwarz was the only man there, Mr. Durst, because you're going to decide who your wife is going to associate with, correct?
My wife can associate with anybody she wants. She can even associate with Peter Schwarz, but not at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, so why would it matter? Why would you say you're the only guy that's here? What would it matter that he's a guy?
I was stating a fact. You're the only guy here. You should leave.
Why would it matter whether he's, quote, the only guy? What does his gender have to do with anything?
He was with 2 girls. One was his wife, I found out, and the other was his wife's girlfriend. They were sitting on either side of him on the couch.
So I'm still asking you, Mr. Durst, why would you say you're the only guy that's here?
I don't know if that's what I said. I could have told the women they should leave.
Well, Mr. Durst, who's the one that said, get ready, who said the following on August 11, 2021? I said to him, it's late. You're the only one that's here. You should leave. Who said that?
I said it.
Andrew Jarecki didn't tell you to say that, right?
No, Andrew Jarecki did not tell me to say that.
So, Mr. Durst, what you just said, I don't really know, that was your sworn testimony. And your other part of your sworn testimony is, I want to understand this. You think that he might have hit his face on your foot. Is that correct?
I think he hit his face on the coffee table.
And then you said, quote, he might have hit his face on my foot, unquote. Can you describe what you meant by that?
The two of us fell down on the floor. Kathy had gone to Greece the previous summer, and we had bought a Greek rug called a flocati, Flokati. The flocati is about 2 inches thick, and it was about 4 by 5 feet wide. It flew out from underneath our feet, and we both fell down. He hit his face on something, probably the coffee table, maybe my foot. I was wearing cowboy boots.
You would agree. Remind me, there's another struggle in this case where people fall to the ground and the other person gets injured. Do you know what I'm referring to?
No,
No. Isn't that what you said happened to Morris Black?
no.
You said you struggled, you fell to the ground. I just want to clarify. Is it a possibility that maybe Morris's head ran into the bullet from your gun? Kind of like Peter Schwartz's face ran into your foot. Is that maybe what happened?
No.
So, Mr. Durst, you discussed this incident with your close friend, Nick Chabin, is that correct?
I discussed what incident? Morris Black,
No, Peter Schwarz.
Peter Schwarz,
Yes.
Nick Chabin. I might have, I don't recall doing so.
Mr. Chabin testified that in essence you told him that you would kick Peter Schwarz in the face as Schwarz was sitting or lying on the ground. That's what Nick Chabin testified to. Is it your position that that is inaccurate?
My position is that Nick Chabin told many, many lies.
You also heard Mr. Chabin testify that you said you had done this because you were angry with Schwarz because you thought he had been flirting with Kathy. Is that true?
That's extremely untrue. Peter Schwarz was there with 2 women.
Did you ever mention any self-defense or any marijuana or any mound of cocaine to Nick Chabin?
I don't know what Nick Chabin said. I don't remember discussing an incident with him at all.
After this incident, you ended up paying off Peter Schwarz to avoid litigation, correct? Is that right?
He sued me.
And you paid him off to avoid litigation, correct?
I don't believe I paid him off. I think his lawyer quit.
So, Mr. Durst, Mr. Schwarz also testified that during the incident, Kathy said that you had a gun. Is that true? That you had a gun at that time?
I did not have a gun, and Kathy was not there.
Would you agree that when you walked in, for whatever reason, you were extremely angry with Peter Schwarz? I'm not asking you why, I'm just saying you were angry, weren't you?
When I walked in, I didn't even know he was there.
When you walked in and saw him, you became extremely angry, correct?
He says I was enraged. He also testified that when I met him at Gilberta's house, I was enraged. I think he has a problem with this enraged word.
Great memory, but let's try to answer my question. When you walked in and saw him in your apartment, is it fair to say that you were very angry?
I was not very angry.
Well, you mentioned as an example that when you walked in, you were asked by Mr. Jarecki, what was the feeling you had when you came in the Christmas dinner and Kathy had not left yet? And your response was something to the effect of total rage or total anger. Do you recall saying that? I'll play the clip for you again if you need to hear it. Do you recall that?
I'm reading what you said.
All right.
So now we're on Christmas dinner. This has nothing to do with Kathy. I don't recall saying that.
I want you to assume, Mr. Durst, that you said something to the effect of you were extremely angry or enraged. I'm just asking you that when you are confronted with situations where people are there when you don't think they should be there, or maybe when your wife isn't ready to go home when she told you she would do so, you have a habit of becoming very, very angry, correct?
Not correct.
All right, let's go to, by March 27th, 1981, you would agree by that time you and Kathy were exchanging kind of nasty letters, correct? Regarding issues about separation and property, is that right?
I do not remember Kathy sending me nasty letters or me sending Kathy nasty letters.
All right, around June of 1980, you moved out of the East 86th Street apartment and into the Riverside Drive penthouse, correct?
June of 1980. I moved out of the 12 East 86th Street apartment because Kathy asked me to.
And you moved into Riverside Drive, right?
I did not move to Riverside Drive until Labor Day weekend when Kathy and I, or I guess in June of 81, Kathy and I went to contract on the Riverside Drive penthouse. I moved in after Labor Day, 1981.
Mr. Durst, your memory about the innocuous detail of what day you moved into the apartment, would you agree it is substantially better than it is about an incident where you violently threw a large glass of water at your wife in the car? Is that true?
It's rather substantially different incidents. I have no idea when the large glass of water thing theoretically happened.
All right, let's talk about Kathy's drug use. Would you agree that you and your attorneys have emphasized Kathy's alleged heavy use of cocaine? Is that true?
I think we accurately described Kathy's use of cocaine.
And is it your testimony that Kathy was basically at the end some kind of cocaine addict? Is that your testimony?
I'm not sure what a cocaine addict is, but I guess she was pretty much addicted, yes.
And wouldn't you agree that rather than being a cocaine addict, Kathy was a recreational cocaine user who was attending medical school and going to rotations during this alleged cocaine addiction?
She was missing lots of classes during her cocaine. The last 9 months or so of school, she was repeatedly missing classes, and those doctors testified as much.
Oh, I thought you said yesterday, Mr. Durst, that in fact her cocaine didn't really become a problem until November of 1981. That's only 3 months before she disappeared. Which is it?
guess it got worse and worse over the summer. And in November of 1981, she went to Lenox Hill Hospital in an outpatient get off the drugs program.
When did you say she went to Lenox Hill?
November of 1981.
So, Mr. Durst, you have attempted to magnify your wife's drug use to support the idea that somehow her cocaine use was the cause of her disappearance, correct?
That's a comment. Overruled.
Is that correct, Mr. Durst?
I always thought that whatever happened probably had something to do with cocaine.
In fact, you testified on August 11, 2021, quote, "Well, there's no way you can snort as much cocaine as she was snorting and still do the various stuff that she was supposed to do. She was working in the hospital involved in patient care." That's what you testified to, right?
Correct.
Can we put up her rotation? I think it's general medicine in November of 1981 while I ask my next question. I'm sorry, I don't have the site. Do you honestly believe, Mr. Durst, that your wife was literally some kind of cocaine addict at the same time she's interacting with patients and successfully functioning as a medical student? Is that your testimony?
The cocaine was adversely affecting her schooling, but she was hanging in there.
So now you heard the testimony of her fellow medical students. My question is, can you square their testimony that Kathy was a conscientious student and that none of them, not one, saw any evidence of cocaine addiction? Can you square that with your own description?
I thought that both the lady who was from Bermuda, Marion Waddington, and I think his last name was Herrick, Peter Herron, said that they were aware that Kathy was doing cocaine.
You're talking about Dr. Peter Halperin?
Maybe.
Dr. Peter Halperin testified to issues regarding his knowledge of domestic violence between you and Kathy. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you recall that I believe Dr. Peter Halperin and his wife he was in a rotation with her, the last rotation she ever did, and that she was saying that she was being abused and was falling apart. Do you recall that testimony?
I recall the testimony.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that this cocaine addiction narrative, this is a concoction you dreamed up, lied up, manufactured in order to explain the disappearance of your wife, Kathy, who you killed?
Objection.
Overruled.
Did not kill Kathy. I did not dream up that she was doing too much cocaine. And your own witness, Nick Chavin, testified that Kathy kept trying to buy cocaine from him.
Mr. Durst, let's talk about Kathy's alleged drug rehab. First of all, prior to your testimony on direct examination, you would agree that you've never mentioned this alleged rehab. You didn't mention it to Detective Struck. You didn't mention it to anybody with New York State Police. You didn't mention it to Andrew Jarecki. You didn't mention it to me in our interview. You never mentioned it to anybody in law enforcement or the media prior to your testimony last week, did you?
I don't know why I would have brought it up with Detective Strzok.
So you're telling me that you had information that your wife was in drug rehab at Lenox Hill Hospital, and you're saying she disappears, and you wouldn't have thought that that would have been something that you would say to the detective, hey detective, my wife is going through cocaine rehab at this hospital. You're telling me you did not think that would be something that would be important for you to mention to the investigating detective on the case?
I'm sure I told Mike Strzok that she was doing lots of cocaine.
Mr. Durst, is that the question I asked you? Did I ask you whether you told Detective Strzok that your wife was supposedly doing large amounts of cocaine, or did I ask you, did you tell him that she started rehab for cocaine at Lenox Hill Hospital? Which question did I ask you?
I think you asked me both questions.
No, I didn't ask you both questions. Let me be clear. Listen to my question. Did you, Mr. Durst, ever tell anybody in law enforcement, Detective Strzok, the New York State Police, Joe Becerra, the Mark and Andrew during your interviews, any media people, or myself and detectives, did you ever mention that your wife was undergoing outpatient rehab for cocaine addiction at Lenox Hill Hospital prior to your testimony last week?
I would have had no reason. First of all, I never heard of Joe Becerra until whenever I heard of Joe Becerra. When Janine Pirro and Joe Becerra did the reinvestigation, reopening, I never met with Joe Becerra. To this day, I have not met with Joe Becerra, so I never would have had an opportunity to tell Joe Becerra anything about Kathy.
So the answer to my question would be no. Is that correct? You never told anybody prior to your testimony last week. Correct or incorrect?
Incorrect.
Okay. Who did you tell?
When Kathy disappeared, I told Nick Scapetta. And I'm sure Nick Scapetta told his investigator, Ed Wright.
Why would you have told Nick Scapetta about Kathy's alleged rehab, and not told Mike Strzok?
I'm not aware that I did not tell Mike Strzok.
Well, Mr. Durst, do you think I'm familiar with the discovery in this case? What do you think?
Yeah, object to that. Don't make yourself the witness.
Mr. Durst, I want you to assume for a moment that there's not one mention of Lenox Hill rehab or any rehab for Kathy in any statement you've ever given to anybody. I want you to assume that for a moment. Can you explain why that would be the case?
Well, I don't believe that is the case. I do believe I told Nick Scapetta, and I do believe Nick Scapetta told his investigator, Ed Wright. Whether or not I told Mike Strzok, I don't remember. I have never told Joe Becerra anything, have never met with him. So there'd be no reason for me to be telling Joe Becerra.
You met with Andrew Jarecki for something like 20 hours. You went over intimate details regarding this case. Can you explain why you never told him that Kathy was undergoing rehab at Lenox Hill? You didn't tell him, you agree, correct?
I have no idea if I told him or not.
I want you to assume, Mr. Durst, that in the 20 hours of interviews, you never told him. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure your attorneys will produce the statement to Detective Strzok, the statement to Andrew Jarecki, and I'll look really foolish.
I wouldn't be surprised if I told your star witness, Nick Chavin, about Kathy going to Lenox Hill. I wouldn't even be surprised if Kathy told Nick Chavin she was going to Lenox Hill.
So the answer to my question then would be, other than Nick Scappetta and Ed Wright, and let's be clear, Nick Scappetta is your lawyer, and you're aware that there is attorney-client privilege, correct? You're aware of that, correct?
He was my lawyer. He died.
Yeah, boy, that's convenient, Mr. Durst. So,
The convenient part is not a question, and it's a comment, it's an argument to the jury before it's time for argument.
Mr.
So-
Durst, would you agree that in...
Sustained, yes.
What's that?
No, he wanted reassurance that I'd sustained his objection, I
Yeah,
did.
Would you agree that in naming Nick Scappetta and Ed Wright, you've named two people who are dead?
I don't think Ed Wright's dead.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you're well aware that Ed Wright is either deceased today or in his late 90s?
I have no idea how old he would be. I have no knowledge of being dead or alive, except that I guess I know he was alive in 2017 because somehow he got involved in the McCormack family's lawsuit against me.
So, Mr. Durst, again, other than Nick Scappetta and Ed Wright, is there anybody that you can mention that you ever told this story to, that Kathy Durst was undergoing rehab at Lenox Hill Hospital starting in November of 1981?
I cannot think of anyone who I would have told.
And would you agree then that the first time, other than your alleged comments to Nick Scappetta and to Ed Wright, occurred in this courtroom within the past week when you mentioned it? Correct?
What I'm saying is, I don't know if I told Nick Scappetta and Ed Wright. It was a long time ago. Kathy disappeared February 1st of 1982.
You testified your wife went to Lenox Hill Hospital for rehab. That's on the Upper East Side, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree, and I'm sure Mr. DeGuerin is very good on New York geography, so he can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but Lenox Hill Hospital is nowhere near Einstein or Jacoby, which are located in the Bronx. Is that correct?
Einstein's in the South Bronx. Lenox Hill Hospital is in the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
And how long, if somebody were going to take a bus or the subway, would it take to go from Jacoby to Lenox Hill Hospital?
I have no idea. Kathy always drove.
Would you agree that even back in 1981, that driving through the boroughs could take lots of time, which is why many people in New York use public transportation? Not an easy place to be driving. It's not like LA, correct? Well, it's easy. It might not be as quick.
I don't think there was any subway anywhere near the Riverside Drive apartment that went anywhere near Albert Einstein. I don't know about buses.
So, Mr. Durst, is it your position? You said that your wife went to rehab now in November of 1981. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you discussed, please play RD 716. 8/11/21, I want to make sure you still agree with this statement that you gave August 11th last week.
And Your Honor, this would be a new clip. It is 303 and 303A.
303, 303A.
Around Thanksgiving of 1981.
What was your understanding about what that program was about?
It was an outpatient clinic, I guess. You went 4 or 5 days a week for 3 or 4 hours. They did not believe in cold turkey. Their theory was if their patients can decrease whatever it's doing that they don't want to do, and that's an accomplishment. Whether they were smoking cigarettes or shooting heroin, as long as the patient did less of it every week, they considered that a success.
Did Kathy complete that course, if you know?
I don't think she did, no.
I just want to make sure, is that still your testimony, Mr. Durst, of what happened with respect to Kathy in the rehab?
That's my testimony, that's what I recall happening.
And, Mr. Durst, let me ask you, how long did Kathy do this alleged rehab at Lenox Hill?
Six weeks.
So, are you telling us that your wife, while working crazy hours in a rotation in a hospital as a fourth-year medical student, where she is responsible for taking care of patients, that in the middle of all this, she was attending drug rehab 4 to 5 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day at another hospital? Is that your testimony?
That's my testimony.
Can you explain, Mr. Durst? Does it make sense to you? Would it go something like this? Doctor, I'm very sorry. I need to leave my rotation now. I have drug rehab. I'm a cocaine addict. I understand I'm working with patients, dispensing medication, and responsible for people's lives, but I'm an addict and I need to go to my cocaine outpatient clinic. It's 3 to 4 hours, so I'm going to be gone for the next 4 or 5 hours because I got to transport back and forth. Does that in any way, Mr. Durst, forget about whether it's credible, does that even seem possible for a medical student about to graduate?
That's what she was doing.
So I want to ask you, if you heard somebody tell you that story, would your response be, are you kidding me? That is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Or would it be, makes a lot of sense, I can see it. What would your response be?
That's what she did.
So, forgetting about what she did, I'm just asking you, when you hear that, just listening to it, does it sound credible to you?
It sounds credible to me because that's what she did.
Okay. Are you aware that on October 1st, 1981, Kathy passed her ER rotation with good evaluation and no absences? Are you aware of that? These are records that your already has.
I'm not aware of that.
I guess you weren't. This is exactly the point, Mr. Durst, where you're saying her cocaine addiction was so bad that she had to seek help. Agreed? Agreed, Mr. Durst?
I think she looked into getting help during
put
the
up the
summer
general.
and did not go ahead with any of the programs.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. You know what? Let's do the second one. It's fine. trying to move it along.
What are you projecting?
People's 25A.
Thank you.
It's going to be page 54 of 25A. The general medicine rotation ending November 30th, 1981.
So, Mr. Durst, this is a document that has already been stipulated to, and it's a part of the evidence. Kathy Durst is your wife, class of 82. She's doing general medicine. She is going from October 1st to November 30th. This is literally as she's starting rehab. I want you to look, Mr. Durst, at the evaluation that she has. Now we're going to read, I want you to read out loud. Please read the narrative.
Miss Durst. I think it says Miss Durst. Is an intelligent, caring, and can't read the next one.
You know what, I'll read it. I'll make it easier. Miss Durst is an intelligent, caring, and hardworking student who demonstrated reliability and responsibility in patient care. Her knowledge base was not as strong as that of most of her peers and needs expansion by the time she enters her house staff training. Her workups were of good quality and her progress notes were careful and well thought out. Her attendance in rounds and conferences should have been better, yet in the direct management of her patients, she was thorough and worked long and uncomplaining hours. Her interpersonal relations were excellent with all members of the hospital staff. Her overall performance was very good. If she continues to grow, both in factual knowledge and in her clinical judgment, she should be a very good physician. Does that sound like the evaluation of a drug addict?
Her attendance to rounds and conferences should have been better.
So what you take from that is that because it says her attendance in rounds and conferences should have been better, does that sound like a drug addict to you?
No,
You're making this up literally as you go along, aren't you?
no.
Comment on the testimony.
Overruled. It's a fair question. Is he making it up as he goes along?
It's an accusation.
It is an accusation, and Mr. Lewin may present that to the witness. The witness may answer whether or not he is making it up as he goes along.
How do you square your version of who Kathy was at this time with this evaluation, a very good evaluation talking about the long and uncomplaining hours she's working, with your description of her as a drug addict enrolling in rehab? Can you square it?
That's what was happening.
I'm going to take that's what was happening as no, I cannot square it. Correct?
No, I cannot swear what.
You cannot square your allegation that your wife was a drug-addicted cocaine addict at the same time that she is successfully completing a difficult rotation with very good marks and a very good evaluation. Correct?
This all happened. Factually happened. She did whatever it says up there, and she was having problems with cocaine.
So, Mr. Durst,
She was going to Lenox Hill.
So, Mr. Durst, how on earth would she be able to, by your accounts, 4 to 5 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day? She also has to commute over there. Just even logistically, how is she going to be able to do this rotation at the same time she's doing, or about to start, cocaine rehabilitation?
She did it.
All right. let's talk for a moment, Mr. Durst. You have said that Kathy wanted to do a residency in Long Island, is that correct? That's what you testified to.
No, I said Kathy was afraid she would have to do her residencies in a small suburban hospital on Long Island or New Jersey.
Oh, where did she want to do her residency?
She wanted to go to a major teaching hospital.
Do you know where?
Any of the major teaching hospitals.
Do you know what what the match is, Mr. Durst? Do you know what the match is when I say the match?
Only what I learned from when the doctors testified.
Well, wait a minute. Your wife was in her 4th year, about to go through the match. Supportive husband that you were, you're telling me you did not know about what the match was?
I still don't know what a match is.
Mr. Durst, haven't you already testified that, according to you, Kathy was concerned that she was not going to match in the kind of residency that she wanted because she didn't have good enough scores?
She was going to put it off. I thought that's what was going on with her not going to school, that she wanted to put off the match until she could improve her record.
Are you aware, Mr. Durst, that when medical students graduate from medical school, they rank the programs and the locations where they want to go? So a person might say, I want to do orthopedics at Harbor UCLA. And they put that's my number one choice. They rank that number one. And then the institutions, Harbor UCLA, is going to rank the medical students. And then what happens is it goes through a match and people get assigned their residencies. You're aware of this, correct?
Only what I've learned here when the doctors testified.
Well, you already had knowledge, you said, about Kathy specifically wanting to delay, being worried she wasn't going to match where she wanted. So are you disputing anything that I just told you? Does that sound accurate?
Add to it, all people who go to medical school do not become doctors per se. The better the medical school is, the lower the percentage of graduates who go out to become doctors. At a school like Albert Einstein, there are numerous opportunities other than becoming a medical doctor. One of Kathy's best friends, Bill O'Brien.
Motion to strike is non-responsive at this point.
This is a narrative.
Yes, right.
Yes, it's a non-responsive narrative, Mr. Durst. Thank you.
This is a non-responsive narrative.
Yes, let's see.
Kathy's friends.
Stop on your non-responsive narrative, please. All right, all people, let's see. Part of it was responsive, I think, so hold on. Video knowledge, you disputing anything I just told you. Stricken, answer stricken.
Mr. Durst, are you aware that your wife was already making plans to go through the match? Were you aware of that?
I think she was planning on not going through the match.
Well, are you aware, have you gone through the medical records in this case from Einstein that your attorneys have stipulated to? Have you gone through them?
No.
Do you know which program in the whole world of medicine that she listed as her number one choice of where she wanted to match? Any guesses?
I was expecting her not to go through the match.
Well, I'm asking you, any idea which program of all the programs out there that she could have put number one where she wanted to match? Do you know what program that was?
No.
If I were to ask you to pick, given everything you know, the last place that she would put to match as a resident, what place would it be?
I have no idea.
Can we put it up, please?
Your Honor, this is People's 25A, and it's page 74.
I don't think it's impeachment. You're presenting evidence through this witness?
Yep,
Okay.
this has already been admitted. Rank order, number 1, Mr. Durst, Lenox Hill Hospital,
I'm
New
sorry?
York.
It's not impeachment, Mr. DeGuerin. It's not offered for that purpose, right?
Correct, and if it were, it would still be proper impeachment because the court could find that he's being deliberately evasive in his answers. But
Well-
it's admissible 6 different
Well,
ways.
let's not argue the point. The objection's overruled. It's entirely proper to present this to the jury at this time.
Mr. Durst, look what's number 1. The program she wants to go to is Lenox Hill Hospital.
Oh, she was already there.
Yes, as a drug addict patient? Let me understand this. I guess the interview would have gone something like this. Dr. Durst, what makes you...
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to...
I know. You're doing a character.
Okay, I'm going to give the following
Yeah,
hypothetical.
just do it.
Following hypothetical. Mr. Durst, I want you to assume that Kathy Durst, your wife, is going to have an interview because that's what
You want me
happened.
to assume that Kathy Durst what?
Your wife, and she would be now Dr. Kathy Durst, is going to have an interview with her number 1 choice, Lenox Hill Hospital. And she's going to have an interview with them, and she's going to tell them that she really wants to join their medicine program. Can you imagine, Mr. Durst, if she's asked, well, doctor, why do you want to join our program? Well, I want to say, doctors, your program is, I've been very impressed. Oh, have you worked here, Dr. Durst? No, actually, I'm a patient. I'm in your drug rehab down the hall. Gosh, I hope that's not going to affect my chances, will it? I mean, Mr. Durst,
Sustained.
is there a more incredible thing
Your Honor?
that you've said this entire
I'd like to be
trial?
heard sidebar.
No.
Well, when we break then, Your Honor.
We'll break it in 2 minutes. Let him finish.
Mr. Durst, is it really your position that your wife chose Lenox Hill Hospital to go to rehab when that was going to be the number 1 program she wanted to match for her residency? Does that make sense to you at all?
I think I need to congratulate you. You have just broken your personal record. You have filled up 18 lines on my tablet.
And I want to congratulate you. You've set the perjury record.
Your Honor, well, I'm moving from, Your Honor, I have a motion. I have a motion, Your Honor. Well, I will have a motion, Your Honor.
Mr. Durst, I'm asking you, does this in any
I
way...
sustain the objection.
Does this in any way, Mr. Durst, make any sense at all to you? Is it really your testimony that your wife would be going to drug rehab in the middle of a rotation at the very same program where she wants to work as a doctor? Does that in any way make sense to you?
You're asking me to try to explain my wife. I cannot explain my wife. This is what she did.
So let me just ask you, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that although you cannot explain your wife, I want to give you the following hypothetical. This is my last question of the day.
In 1 minute.
I want you to assume that you have a 4th-year medical student who is very interested in doing a residency at a certain institution. They have a cocaine problem. Out of all the different places they can go to get help, they decide they're going to go to the very program they want to match in for residency. Does that make any sense to you at all?
I'm not in a position to judge how these things work. This is what she did. She wanted to go to Lenox Hill if she went ahead with the match. She also wanted to stop doing so much cocaine. The fact that they all lumped together is not something that I can explain.
Well, it would be a
Alright.
shorter commute. She could do her drug rehab at least at the same place she's doing her residency.
Yeah, that would save the commute.
It would.
All right, that's, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want you to know that I sustain the objection that Mr. DeGuerin made to Mr. Lewin's comment. It was inappropriate, and he should not have made that statement. Disregard the statement about perjury, all right? Do not consider that. Now, we'll have you back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case.
I've done this job for a lot of years, and I will tell you that there are, if I can just finish, there are certain points and certain times as I sit up there and Mr. Durst is just demeaning this woman in ways that just, if I can finish, that just as a prosecutor, as a husband, my wife is a surgeon. I was with her while she went through medical school. I know this stuff. And to watch him do that, I will tell you, when his response to what's being shown is to make a joke about how many lines I filled up with my question, I will admit, that caused me to get emotional. It caused me to say something that I should not have said. I was absolutely wrong for saying it, and I apologize to the court, and I apologize to counsel.
All right, I think that it is close to you, and you've explained why it's close to you and why you responded in an inappropriate way. So I did advise the jury to disregard that comment, and I'll hear from the defense.
Your Honor, in the 20th and 21st century, to suggest that a medical school would not want someone to seek help and would use that, in fact, they're not allowed to, against someone because they have a drug problem, as opposed to encouraging people to get help, which is what hospitals do. There are tons of functioning alcoholics, drug addicts in our profession, in the medical profession. So just the whole idea that somehow this is so fantastic.
You're becoming passionate about something, Mr. Chesnoff, that seems to be a fabrication.
Well,
So I would not
Your Honor,
really.
Okay, so I'm going to, Your Honor, I think, I'd rather say what I want to say on the record, not in the public, Your Honor. I have some things I need to say.
Okay, let's go into the
Thanks.
jury room.